Hello everyone, welcome to our discussion on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This is your host Adnan Qaiser. Those of you who have been with me for the past 10 chapters, you know that we have been analyzing different aspects of CPEC or China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. In the last segment, which was chapter 10, if you remember that I had given you out some of the impediments or obstacles that obstruct the successful implementation or execution of this China-Pakistan economic corridor passing through Pakistan. In this segment, which is part 11, as I had mentioned earlier, I plan to conclude my thoughts and analysis on this on the CPEC, and I plan to give you four important aspects of CPEC in this segment. First of all, I will briefly touch upon some of the criticism which comes against CPEC. If you have noted, I have been consistently giving you out some of the international as well as domestic disapproval, apprehensions, concerns, or questions that have been arising against CPEC over a period of time. So obviously, as you know, that this ambitious project of China, which we call Belt and Road Initiative, or OBOR, the One Belt, One Road Initiative, is extremely important for China as well as for Pakistan. So that's why we have to keep in mind two important aspects, that while some of this criticism could be justified, there could be a constructive criticism against CPEC as well, but we cannot rule out ulterior motives as well. There could be some hidden designs connected to the overall global power play and the ugly world of this geopolitics. Number two, ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to give you out some of the unconfirmed and unsubstantiated reports that have been coming out about joint patrolling by the two armies of China and Pakistan to secure this 2,390 kilometers of corridor passing through Pakistan. If you remember, in the last segment, I had given a reference to a 2017's Pentagon's report, which was submitted to the U.S. Congress, forecasting Gwadar becoming a full-fledged Chinese naval base in the Indian Ocean. And if you connect the dots to our discussion in part 4 or 5, we had a detailed discussion about an undeclared war or pursuit for naval dominance in the Indian Ocean. Third, I will touch upon China's new outlook, a very confident and self-assuring outlook about itself as a fast-paced and rising global power in the world. I will quote you some of the statements of Chinese President Xi Jinping, which he made at the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China at the Great Hall of China from 18th to 24th of October 2017, last year. Finally, I will conclude this presentation by sharing with you some of my thoughts and concerns for Pakistan, by which I have mentioned in the introductory part as well, that Pakistan has now chosen to put all its eggs in the Chinese basket. So let's see the criticism first. As the voices against CPEC are becoming louder and louder, the international media has begun to raise critical questions, ladies and gentlemen, about Pakistan's CPEC partnership with China, amid fears that the terms are opaque and secretly negotiated. This multi-billion-dollar investments by Beijing could exacerbate or enhance Islamabad's economic woes and put macroeconomic pressures on its economy. Obviously, as the government is seeking to go for another bailout package from the International Monetary Fund, you are aware that Pakistan has a shortfall of something like 10 to 12 billion dollars, which it's trying to plug from China, Saudi Arabia, or it has to go to the IMF. Quite interestingly, the IMF delegation was in Pakistan a few days ago, and it asked for the contract details and the agreement details of CPEC, which the government of Pakistan refused to provide on 28th of September 2018, just a few days ago. Today is 6th of October, so it was 28th of September 2018. So Wall Street Journal, a very, very distinguished newspaper of the United States, asserted in one of its reports on 22nd of July 2018, and kindly pay attention to the words, ladies and gentlemen, because they cover all the elements of CPEC, and it would be very easy for you to understand the various elements of CPEC by just the 2-3 examples which I'm going to share with you. So it says, and I quote, since the beginning, controversies loomed large about the quantum of loans and investments and the cost of those loans. There are also concerns about allowing sweeping tax concessions to CPEC. 3 years into the CPEC program, Pakistan is hurtling towards a debt crisis, caused in part by a surge in Chinese loans and imports for projects such as Orange Line in Lahore. Wall Street Journal further wrote in this report that some ministers in the previous PMLN government had admitted in their interviews that they should have negotiated better terms with China. So that rests the case that the terms of agreement with China were not negotiated and they were not foolproof. So the report continues. It says, official figures reviewed by the journal showed that China-backed coal power plants had guaranteed annual returns on investment of up to 34% in dollar terms for the next 30 years. In February, so unquote, this report ends here. So understand, I'll connect it, this report, with another report of a very eminent newspaper of Pakistan. It's called the Express Tribune. So one of its reports came in February in 2017, and it had reported that Pakistan had offered up to 34.5% of annual profit on equity invested in coal-fired projects of CPEC. If you remember in the last discussions, I had mentioned that on paper, it was mentioned that 17 to 25% of profit, guaranteed profits, were assured to the Chinese investors, whereas according to these reports, it has shot up to 34 or 34.5%. And horrors of the horrors, ladies and gentlemen, loans that have been obtained at 6% interest rates, excluding the insurance costs. Official documents also showed that if insurance were included, which is also expected to be paid to a Chinese insurance company, the cost of borrowing would surge from 6% to 13%. Furthermore, a former US representative to the IMF and senior advisor Simon Chair in political economy, Mark Sobel, has written in a blog piece in one of the eminent Center for Strategic and International Studies on 30th of July 2018. He said that while CPEC holds forth the prospect of boosting the Pakistani economy, especially if investments are sound, the terms and conditions of much of the lending are opaque, and interest rates on some loans may be higher than Pakistan can afford. But instead of giving some concrete facts and data, the government of Pakistan, ladies and gentlemen, responded with this angry statement on 8th of August 2018, and I would like to quote it for you. The government said, we have noted recent media reports questioning the viability of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, claiming that it would create an unbearable debt burden for Pakistan. Such media reports are one-sided, distort facts, and are based on irresponsible statements by individuals who either have no understanding of CPEC or are driven by ulterior motives. The government statements perplexingly states, ladies and gentlemen, that Chinese energy companies have raised funds from Chinese banks and investors themselves, and these do not constitute any debt obligation on the state of Pakistan. CPEC projects are financed through a composite financing package comprising of long-term government-to-government concessional and preferential loans, as well as grants from the government of China. Repayments on these loans would not commence in the immediate future, unquote. So this government's response, which was pretty angry and and rude, has been viewed by one of another leading newspapers of Pakistan, Dawn, in these words, which I would like to read out to you. So Dawn's editorial on 10th of August 2018, it was titled CPEC Indignation. It noted a recent angry statement by the government about media reports questioning the viability of CPEC has only fueled skepticism instead of addressing concerns. The statement appears to be in response to a few articles that appeared in the international media regarding the terms of which loans have been given by China. The articles have questioned the ability of the Pakistan's economy to service those loans. For a number of years, a former Minister for Planning and Development, Ahsan Iqbal, had used similar language to swat away skeptical talk and all the questions raised about CPEC to little avail. It is similarly useless for the caretaker government to resort to such indignant language. The fact is, the editorial continues, the fact is that the uncomfortable questions as well as pesky media commentary swirl around the entire CPEC enterprise because of the sheer lack of transparency which characterizes this project, unquote. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk a little bit about what is being said about the plans of joint security of CPEC to be provided by the two armies of China and Pakistan. While it is in Pakistan's due rights to seek any geopolitical alignment as well as a strategic partnership with any country it deems fitting, however, there are international concerns as the true nature of Sino-Pakistan relations remains shrouded in mystery. Even the book which I had referred to you in the past, which was written by Andrew Small, it was titled The China-Pakistan Axis, Asia's New Geopolitics. He too has raised certain questions, but unfortunately without giving their straight answers. So, although denied by Beijing, there have been unconfirmed reports of Chinese military presence in Pakistan's Gilgit-Baltistan area and China's plans of using the Gwadar port as its full-fledged naval base in the future. So recent reports of China seeking an agreement with Afghanistan to station its troops at the Wakhan belt bordering Pakistan. It's a 12 kilometers wide belt bordering between Pakistan and Afghanistan in the northwest. All this has further fueled suspicions about China's intentions about establishing a long-term military presence in this region. In my 2015's paper, which I have mentioned earlier as well, it was titled Balochistan Separatism, the Geopolitics of Gwadar and China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So I had cited an AFP report quoting Pakistan Army's Directorate for Inter-Services Public Relations. So according to the report, pledging on behalf of Beijing, the Vice Chairman of China's Central Military Commission, General Fang Chenglong, had extended close cooperation to ensure proper management and security of CPEC, which was taken as a reference to CPEC's joint patrolling by the two armies. People who have studied international diplomacy or practice diplomacy, ladies and gentlemen, know that these words like close cooperation always mean strategic ties, joint ventures, or very close collaboration. So similarly, on his visit to Rawalpindi in May 2018, the Chinese Central Military Commission's Vice Chairman, General Zhang Yuxia, he stated that efforts of Pakistan Army in safeguarding CPEC security are highly appreciated. We look forward to close cooperation with Pakistan to ensure the security of CPEC. So again, in a very rare statement which came from the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, on 29th of March 2018, it said that the close ties between the militaries of China and Pakistan will not only help the all-weather partnership between the two countries, but also maintain regional peace and global stability. So pay attention to these words, close ties and close cooperation in the public communications which are coming from both China and Pakistan. So they intend to give a very, very strong message of a strategic partnership between China and Pakistan. So, however, instead of providing a reassurance in Pakistan, or to highlight Pakistan's self-reliance, that Pakistan carries the wherewithal by having what it is said that Pakistan has 7th largest armies in the world, and Pakistan is 5th biggest nuclear power. These statements, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately sometimes create confusion and apprehension about Chinese military boots on the sovereign territory of Pakistan. So internationally speaking, such a policy may not be allowed to be pursued by Pakistan for Pakistan's sovereignty and its independence notwithstanding. Remember, we live in a world where countries continue to be governed by international sheriffs who have their own strategic interests in the region as well as beyond. So such a policy obviously carries long-term implications and perhaps adverse repercussions on the security and stability of the 10th most fragile states of the world. I'm sure you are aware that Pakistan is often referred as the 10th most fragile states in the world. So it is facing serious threats both internally as well as externally, and especially to its economy. So I leave this discussion here because one, we do not have more information on the subject, and secondly, this is a bit tricky and sensitive subject which obviously is of great national importance. So I leave the leaders to decide about that. So now let's have a look, ladies and gentlemen, about China's new outlook about itself as having established its credentials as a strong economic power, China begins to now look forward towards becoming a credible global power or a superpower, if you will, with one of the finest and armed to tooth militaries in the world. Remember, I have already told you in the previous segment about China's plans to have a world-class army by the year 2050. Which I tell you is not very far. So therefore, Pakistan should also be careful into taking into account China's own new outlook about its rising power status. So instead of blindly trusting Pakistan's iron brother, which China is called, Pakistan must consider the consequences before handing over the keys of its destiny to a country which is aiming pretty big at the world stage. So as I had said earlier, China has begun to rekindle this myth about China's Middle Kingdom's fame and prominence in the world, representing Shangri-La, which I had said that is called heaven on earth. So at the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, President Xi Jinping proudly proclaimed, and please pay attention to the words, the Chinese nation has stood up, grown rich, and become strong, and it now embraces the brilliant prospect of rejuvenation. It will be an era that sees China moving closer to center stage and making greater contribution to the mankind, unquote. So having his ideology chronicled or recorded in the Communist Party's charter, ladies and gentlemen, President Xi has further laid out his foreign policy objectives of influencing the emerging economies or emerging nations of the world. This he has done by offering those countries an alternate Chinese style of socialist model, which of course is quite dissimilar to the Western style democracy which we have experienced. So however, President Xi believes that by following the Chinese approach of governance, the poor nations of the world could accelerate their development while maintaining their independence. Remember what I had told you in the beginning, the doctrine of dominance by debt, and the title of this presentation is also the same. So remember also, China under its present aggressive outlook and its robust attitude could go to any length in seeking its objectives and goals. And mind you, it would go, ladies and gentlemen, to any extent in order to safeguard its political, its strategic, and its economic interests worldwide. So you have lately seen that the tariffs, which the trade war, which has recently started between by the U.S. administration. President Trump had imposed certain restrictions on trade, and China reciprocated in the same coins. So it's a little tricky. So, and this very, very self-assured and confident posture gets reflected in President Xi Jinping's strong militaristic and naval build-up approach at the same annual session of the National People's Congress, addressing nearly 3,000 delegates assembled at the imposing and majestic Great Hall of the People's Republic of China, facing the Tiananmen Square. President Xi Jinping delivered a very fiery and blistering nationalistic speech on 20th of March 2018, warning against any international attempts to split China. This was a reference to China's one China policy, considering Taiwan as an integral part of the mainland China. Taiwan, ladies and gentlemen, remains separated from the mainland China since the Chinese Civil War took place in 1949. So Taiwan gained a kind of independent status in 1952 when the occupied Allied forces they withdrew from the land under the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which was signed on 28th of April 1952. However, it is important to note that despite gaining territorial rights in that treaty as well as in other treaties, Taiwan was not granted territorial sovereignty, and thus this issue lingers on. So in the same speech which I just referred, President Xi also boasted his country's readiness to fight the bloody battle to regain China's rightful place in the world. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, the global powers are a little unnerved about China's transformed outlook, adopting a more assertive and overbearing attitude worldwide. And this Belt and Road Initiative, as well as CPEC, remain one of its manifestations. With this, allow me to conclude my thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, CPEC brings a lot of hopes and promises, no doubt, to Pakistan. As I always say, it is a fortune changer. Yet when it comes to safeguarding Pakistan's own domestic interests, Pakistan should carefully calculate the costs and benefits. We as a sovereign nation must also keep our prime interest, our national interest prime, and must balance out the awe and reverence as well as our newfound infatuation towards our iron brother or all-weather friend. So Pakistan needs to be mindful of China's investments which were made in Sri Lanka, Tajikistan, Malaysia, Maldives, and a few African countries going sour. The Chinese people are not known for reviewing their loans to grant concessions, what to talk of writing them off altogether. So in such a backdrop, the rising costs of the project have compelled these countries to surrender a substantial amount of their land to China in lieu of the heavy debt after finding it unable to repay those loans which had been accumulated. So while Sri Lankans surrendered their territory in the debt equity swap at its Hambantota port, Tajikistan is also said to have ceded 1% of its sovereign land in lieu of those unpaid loans to China. CPEC, as I said, can no doubt promise prosperity to the people of Pakistan. However, the country needs to rely upon its own potential, and while safeguarding its own national interests, emerge as a truly sovereign state. I understand Pakistan's constraints and its dire need to bring China as a major stakeholder in the country, so as to safeguard and protect Pakistan's interests against the existential threat which comes from its arch rival India. If you remember, in the beginning I had mentioned about the 4 states in the world which are national security states, and Pakistan is also called one of the national security states only because it faces existential threat from India. But it must also be reckoned that CPEC's irrational concessions to China may turn out to be backbreaking and pretty strangulating in the future. In his book, the same book which I referred, The China-Pakistan Axis, Asia's New Geopolitics, Andrew Small acknowledges, and I would like to quote it for you, China's posed plans for military bases in FATA, the federally administered tribal areas, Pakistan's supposed intentions to lease China 1/10 of its territory, and the purported presence of 11,000 Chinese troops in Pakistan's north are only a few questionable claims that are taken as accepted truth. Unquote. So under the banner of time-tested and all-weather friendship, ladies and gentlemen, between these two countries, which are often bragged as higher than the Himalayas, deeper than the Arabian Sea, sweeter than the honey, and stronger than steel, voices in Pakistan have begun to emerge, questioning the Chinese generosity as another East India Company in the making. East India Company had been a private British enterprise that ushered in the subcontinent's British colonization, subjugating the subcontinent for nearly 2 centuries. So Christine C. Fair, who is considered to be an authority on South Asia, observed in Foreign Policy in an article titled "Pakistan Can't Afford China's Friendship." She wrote it on 3rd of July 2017. She said, and I quote, "If CPEC is even partially executed, Pakistan would be indebted to China as never before. And unlike Pakistan's other traditional allies, such as the United States, China will probably use its leverage to obtain greater compliance from its problematic client." Unquote. So it is important for you to understand, ladies and gentlemen, that at the end of the day, CPEC remains a Chinese priority for China's own strategic interests. I have always been telling you the China's need to have an alternate trade route for which China can go to any extent. Although Washington needs to be equally blamed for abandoning Islamabad in the new world order, as you know. Washington is leaning towards New Delhi in its pivot to Asia policy, which was started by President Obama. So this is altogether another discussion. But Pakistan has been virtually abandoned by the United States. So Pakistan's decision to seek a closer relationship with China neither diminishes Pakistan's geo-strategic significance, nor undermines its role as a strong Muslim country and a military power and a nuclear power in the region. As I said right in the beginning, that Pakistan is situated at the crossroads of 5 eminent ancient civilizations: the Confucius civilization in the north, the Hindu civilization in the east, the Muslim civilization in the west, and the Persian civilization in the southwest, and its own indigenous Indus Valley civilization in its heartland. So Pakistan has much more to offer, ladies and gentlemen, to the world, but than how it unfortunately prices itself. And that, I have told you, is largely due to our uncommitted and less than faithful political leadership and our elites. Pakistan has now chosen to put all its proverbial eggs in the Chinese basket. However, it's very important to note that having shared liberal democratic values, Pakistan must not alter its future course or terminate its ties with the West. It is less ironic, but it's more consternating to see that Pakistan, which has always remained a steadfast Western ally in the past, one, by choosing to join the American camp immediately after its birth, and having remained a steadfast US ally during the Cold War. Secondly, having been a frontline state in helping to stop the onslaught of a socialist Soviet Union from reaching the warm waters of the Arabian Sea during 1980s, the Afghan Jihad. Number three, fighting the war on terror, the global war on terror, as a major non-NATO ally of the West. But unfortunately, Pakistan is now feverishly welcoming another communist country with open arms but closed eyes that may turn Pakistan into another vassal state. So there are fears and apprehensions. and which I have always feared, ladies and gentlemen, that Pakistan should not one day become what we call subcontinent's North Korea in the South Asia. So with this somber note, I come to the end of this pretty long presentation. I must thank you all for staying with me, patiently going through this rather tedious talk. But I think this was essential for your better understanding as a new generation, because most of you after your studies would be taking up the reins of the government or anywhere in Pakistan. So it would be, remember, it would be your choices, it would be your decisions which will draw and define the destiny of the future of Pakistan. I thank you again with all my sincerity, and I wish you all the best in your careers ahead. So this is Adnan Qaiser signing off from this discussion on China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Thank you very much, and God bless.